financial planning and capacity projections. I would like to thank both Hillary and Linda, our co-treasurers, for doing the work to prepare us tonight to have this conversation. And I'll just hand it over to them.
Great, thank you. So in this the first section is just going to be a presentation, and then after that we'll have time for questions and discussions. And
Hillary, I had meant to do a brief agenda review. Can I just do that first so folks know?
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
great. Sorry, everyone. I'm out of practice. So this is a board working assembly, which is a series that was started a few years ago to give members the chance to see the board at work and to give the board a place to learn about a certain topic really in depth from the people who have been working on that topic. So what we're going to do tonight is discuss only financial planning and capacity projections. Hillary and Linda will be presenting. So they'll give us maybe a half hour or so total presentation. Then we'll have some time for a board discussion where board members can ask questions. We can have some back and forth with the treasurers if necessary. And then we'll go for a period on member feedback. And at that time, anyone who's not a board member or officer can ask questions, give feedback, share thoughts. By 8:15, we'll transition to having a conversation on what the next steps are, and the board can have a final opportunity for discussion. And then we'll do a meeting evaluation if there's time. We will be ending tonight by 8:30. So let's keep that in mind as we ask questions. All right, now to you, Hillary and Linda. Thank you.
okay, thank you. And this is where Linda will need screen sharing, and I'll go ahead and start talking as you guys get that going, because the first screen just says board working session and financial planning. It's just a header. And please forgive me, but I am going to talk a lot from my notes, so I'm going to be looking down. I was jotting notes through the day, and I just feel more confident that I can catch all my points if I refer to my notes. So this work session is on two topics because they're so interrelated. The revenue projection, we typically have not done a separate work session on. It's been presented at, say, usually in recent years, the November board meeting, and it can take up quite a bit of time for discussion. And partly because we have several new board members, this just seemed like a really good year to have a work session on it and a chance for people to spend some time chewing on it and getting introduced to a lot of the concepts in it. The revenue projection is basically the combination of prices and volume. And the volume is the capacity information and the stuff on growth, which has been more of a topic this year than in the past. In the past, a lot of it's been much more on the prices, and the volume factors were kind of set either by the budget or by the attendance cap. So we didn't mess with those as much. We were just making informed estimates on those. But to present them together, just made a lot of sense. We've been having a lot of conversations about growth. We've been calling it either capacity or event parameters, or the oldest word that's been most persistent is growth, managing our growth. So I'm going to talk first about the capacity portion of the work session, and then Linda will lead you through the revenue projection portion of it. The January board meetings when we are going to be, Linda, can we go back?
Come back?
Yes, stay right there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I'm going to need you to stay there for a little while.
Okay.
Yeah, so the last Monday in January, we will present the revenue projection for the board, the proposal for the board to consider. Okay, so I'm going to go through this and also define the terms metrics a little bit before we go on to the next slide. So the capacity summary, this is what we're going to look at tonight. The capacity summary timeline is kind of an overview of the history of our growth that's in summary form. People on property, that's the word I've been using for this metric recently. So this chart will be it's a calculation on what constitutes the people on property, the growth drivers and impacts, briefly talking about the impacts of growths, and then next steps will be the next one. But before we go to the next slide, I do want to talk about metrics. I've been using the word metrics quite a bit, and mostly when I've been talking about it, I've been talking about the growth metrics that we already use and growth metrics that I'm hoping that we will develop. And in our next slide, you'll see a lot of these. And so I want to talk to you about the definitions of them and how we've used them in the past, because I think it gets pretty confusing. A lot of times in the past, we've said things like we had 45,000 people at the fair. And what that number meant, that was only talking about how many tickets we sold to the public for the whole weekend. So when that number goes out to the media, it's really confusing because they often assume we had 45,000 public there at one time, and we didn't. But we also talk about our daily attendance, and that's the number that, it's been the attendance cap in the past, the daily attendance. Or if you go to a budget, if you go to a revenue projection and we say, we base this revenue projection on 13,000 on Friday, 17,000 on Saturday, and 13,000 on Sunday, that's again talking about the daily attendance. And we'll throw those numbers out a lot. When we talked about 10,000 for the year 2022, that was a daily number. But when we talk about this new number that we've been talking about, the people on property, is a different metric that for a long time we weren't even able to come up with this metric, because it's looking at one day, but it's looking at the total people that we think are on property, giving the best estimate, some with hard numbers and some with estimates of how many people we think are there, internal population, ticket buyers, and the internal population includes even people who have day passes and people who are camping. So those are the types of numbers that we're going to be talking about, and more we're talking about the daily attendance numbers and the number and the people on property. So now let's go to this next, the capacity summary timeline, the slide number 3. This one has a lot of data on it, and I'll go over it some. We have talked about growth in different ways in different times, and the critical points have been very, very different for us. Remember 1997, a lot of things happened that year. That was the year of the drug and alcohol policy. We opened Chela Mela. We went to offsite ticket sales. We opened the Far Side. So it's a really pivotal year of a lot of things that changed. Before that, when all tickets were sold on site, in order to call a sellout, somebody on the property had to say, yeah, it's getting really full. We need to call town and tell them not to let anybody else on the buses. So then everybody who was still on West 11th in a bus was in the system and had to be allowed in. Anybody who had bought a ticket in town, we were trying, we'd have to stop the ticket sales in town and try to make sure people got in. So it's very, very difficult to control. At that point, we had the left bank. Chela Mela had just opened, but even before we opened Chela Mela, there were years back then when we sold 50,000 total tickets. So some of those daily admissions were over 26, or they were close to 25,000 on some of those Saturdays. So if you remember the late 90s, before 97, we had some incredibly crowded years. Our internal population was not nearly as large as what it is now, but it was also almost impossible to count. We didn't have the virtual sticker booth. We had a lot of different systems. We had no way to pull all the numbers together, and we weren't really motivated to pull all the numbers together, partly because of the mass gathering. We didn't want the mass gathering law to apply to us. So we budgeted, and we knew how much we put out through the budget. We had estimates, but a lot of our budget numbers weren't necessarily the actual numbers. So those years, it was all the growth that we could control was related to the ticket sellers or the ticket buyers. I'm pretty sure there was in 98, when after 97 was just crazy crowded. 98 turns out with the drug and alcohol policy, people decided we had a huge drop off in attendance. We were down at like 38,000. But then after that, it hit its stride in the 40 to 45,000 for the weekend. So that could be, typically it'd be about 13,000 on a Friday, 17,000 on a Saturday, 15 on a Friday, 17 on a Saturday, and maybe 13 on a Sunday. But it kind of averaged out. So anyway, I think that's when we started having the 18,000 per day as our attendance cap set by the board, that we would not sell more than 18,000 tickets. There were sometimes we went over, sometimes it was hard to control. Sometimes, I don't know how it happened. Sometimes we sold more tickets. So in 2015, another huge growth spurt. Like, and we had other smaller growth spurts in the 98 to 2014. You know, we opened Xanadu. We opened Wally's Way. We opened Open Sesame. There was one more small one besides Chayla. Anyway, there would be small spurts at that point. But for 2015, when we opened Xanadu, that was opening up 5 acres. The crew itself was large. We had established a camping crew before that to move all the campers who were in what used to be the crafts lot. That was a large crew. We had to add to water crew. We added to Whitebird. We added to security crews. You know, it was just this massive effect. And then we started to feel the ripple effects after that of, oh, turns out we need, some more recyclers. Oh, construction really can't go back to how it was before. So there were huge ripple effects from Xanadu that continued. But because we had 5 more acres, we did raise the attendance cap to 21,000 a day. We had a very big year. Publicity works, apparently. You can see it in the attendance numbers. 2015, we did a lot of publicity, and it was a really big year for us. And the next super big year we had was 2019. Again, big publicity. People were very excited about the 50th. We brought a lot of extra people. We kind of didn't hold back. We said we wanted to bring people who had been important to us in the past. We wanted to, make sure people who wanted to come could come. And the attendance, we had super high attendance. It was just massively high. The highest number by 2019, we can get a pretty good count on our internal pass numbers. We run a QuickBooks inventory system, both in the inventory yurt and in registration. And so if those are used properly, we can get very, very good numbers. The inventory crew also tracks wristbands distributed. So we have a lot more capacity to pull those numbers together, but we still don't have one system that we can just look at, and definitely not a contemporaneous system that we can go, oh, this is what our internal population is as of right now. We have much better capacity to do that working with Tickets West on our ticket sales. So then 2022, you all know what happened. We had gone into it with the board had approved the people on property, we called it event parameters in the motion that was passed in 2021 to have no more than 35,000 people per day as the people on property, which meant we would have about 20,000 internal population and selling 15,000 tickets a day to the public but what ended up happening is that instead of the 15,000 tickets a day, we limited that to 30,000 a day because of COVID concerns and, getting this big operation up and running. And it was kind of a strain. So in 2022, our internal passes exceeded the daily tickets sold. So that's a really quick overview of, our different growth issues. What's clear is that our ticket sales does not grow in a straight line. It's not geometric. It's more up and down and up and down. Our internal growth is it's been going up steadily, then it jumps up, and then there's ripple effects and steady until we do another expansion or bring on another program or have we have a lot more control over it in some ways, but we haven't gone into it with, we haven't gone into it with the idea that we're looking at the overall numbers and trying to hit a target. And that's what this people on property and the approach that we've been talking about recently is intended to do, is to help us both consider the detail, which we do really well in our budget process, and consider the overall effects and kind of start with where are we trying to go instead of, working on a budget. looking at individual programs and not thinking of it in relation to each other. So let's go to the next slide, Linda. Okay, so this is the calculation of people on property, and I will show you why I was really motivated for us to get to talk about this. So if you look at 2018, those are the crew numbers up in the upper left corner, and the SO numbers, these are actual numbers, and the non-crew includes entertainers, it includes elders, includes what we call trade passes that go to, you know, people like that bring the toilets and people who do other services that aren't on crews. And then the vendor passes, teen crew passes, and purchase teens. And then the day pass number is the total number of day passes divided by 3 for the event, and then the tickets sold. So in 2018, we actually had people on property per day of about 35,000. And that the average daily admission, you know, it wasn't even every single day. Our typical pattern, which this was our typical pattern, Saturday's much higher than the other days, but it averaged out to about 15,000 a day. And then if you look at 2019, we sold a lot more. We sold a lot of tickets, but all of our numbers were up. And so this people on property was almost 41,000 a day. So that was a huge jump just between 2 years. So after that, we made a 2020 budget before COVID hit. So we had this budget in our back pocket and COVID hits. And then you kind of look at it and you go, oh my gosh, look at this. We could end up with a fair that's not a super fancy fair, that's not the 50th, that has almost the same number of people, that's approaching that very large number of people. And we already knew we were strained on parking, we were strained on recycling, we were strained on camping. We had a lot of systems that were really stressed. And this is when we started to talk about the capacity limits. And the proposal that I had put together was saying 2018 did not feel, you know, we had been at that same level we were at 2018 for 17, 16, and 18. And that was a level that was not, it wasn't creating that same kind of panic among some of the crews that feel those pressures. So it would give us breathing room without the pressure to say, we're going to totally reorganize, we're going to totally cut crews, we're going to totally change our model, but it would give us breathing room if we aimed for that size. So that was the thinking of proposing 300 or 35,000. So this, the 2020, let's see, the second 2020 budget here is, before the fair, that was kind of penciling out. If we did this, we could hit that 35,000 again. And what we ended up doing, you know, what passed, but by the time we got our budget done for that, the second time we did the 2020 budget, sorry, I'm confusing my 2020 and my 2022. The 2022 budget was based on the 2020, but there were some increases, but then we actually were able to pull it down partly by pulling down the attendance. And there was a few of the other things that we tried to pull down, like going into 2022. If you've read those capacity documents, we suggested trying things like, let's try to cut some of our comp passes. Let's not do the late sales of SOs. Let's try to do some things that aren't going to hit at any core groups who are attached to the fair, but that we could have some impact. And then the rest of it we'll just take out of the attendance. And that's basically what we were planning on doing. And then what happened was, because of COVID, we cut down our admissions, and we had a lot of people who didn't want to come because of whatever circumstances. So if you look at these numbers for 2022, some of these are fairly accurate. Some of these, it's really hard to tell. The crew numbers we think are fairly accurate. But if you look, I'll point out three of these. In the 2019, look at the SOs compared to the crews. That's over 75%. Crews get 75% of their SOs, but that's over by about 10% of that. So we were selling extra SOs that year. If you look at the budget for 2022, that's That's just dead on 75%, which we budget for. But if you look at what actually happened in 2022, we didn't sell as many SOs as we were budgeted for, but we had just about as many crew. So logically, to me, what that means is if a crew, was missing some of their crew members, they could have easily said to somebody who might have qualified for an SO pass, come on and be on the crew instead. So the combined numbers are much lower, but the crew numbers were pretty consistent, but the SO numbers were very low. Non-crew numbers not impacted deeply. Vendors were lower. This is a number that I don't have a lot of confidence in. I got one number from registration and one number from inventory, and the two numbers were off different from each other by about 1,000. So I'm not really positive where that number comes in. There's some of the other numbers that are really hard to have confidence in too, like the day passes. What we have numbers for is how many we handed out. What we don't have numbers for is how many were used. So that's something that would be nice to get fixed in the system of collecting those passes or scanning them, finding some way to verify how many were used. But the net effect was that 2022, as you know, was a much lighter fare. It was dramatically lighter than we've had for years and years and years. And then this 2023, this is actually not a projected. This is what if we decided that we wanted to reduce below 35,000 without cutting the admissions below 15,000 a day? What would it take? And I'm not proposing this. I don't think this is the first step. I think our first step is 35,000 a day with any low-hanging fruit that we can get. But just to think, this is pretty dramatic. If we were to cut crew by 10%, or if we were to cut non-crew by, this is about 10%. This is not cutting the vendors. And if we're cutting the day passes, that almost like 40%, those are really dramatic cuts. So I just want people to be aware, like when you start talking about cuts, it hits a lot of people really, really quickly if we are, going to affect our internal population. So it's something we have to tread really lightly and be very thoughtful about how we go about it. And I think it's going to take us a couple of years to figure out. And I'm not sure that we need to cut our internal population, but I do think we need to figure out evolving ways to meet new and different needs, and which might mean shifting people around some. I think that's a much more viable option for us, to shift people around and find other ways to have them be included than it is to just do raw cuts to our internal population. And I'm ready for the next slide, Linda.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
So we know the kind of things that drive growth, and I've alluded to some of them. Growth begets growth. Anytime we add new passes, there's ripple effects. So that's been one thing. We add new passes because the event grows. We like new programs. We've had some really great new programs. We get new stages. We get, years ago, Community Village and Energy Park didn't have nearly as big of entertainment section as they do now. They had, new sections. We didn't have all the services we did now. Yes, Grumpy elders are included in all those numbers. So they, new programs drive it. Site changes, losing path due to the river changing drives it. Extreme weather and climate change, infrastructure needs. We add people to solve problems or to add programs. We are not very good about refocusing crews and asking them to do something different, although some crews do self-initiate and change what they're doing because their old function becomes somewhat outdated. And we're not very good to saying to crews whose function might be outdated, let's go change it and, find some, a more current, more necessary thing. We've just been adding people to solve problems. And our participants have a lot of passion and enthusiasm for the fair. Folks love it. They, bring their families and they want to bring their friends. And so at some level, there's, it's a kind of chicken and an egg, which is the passion driving the growth? Is the growth driving the passion? Is the program being developed to make sure that we can include new people? It all just ends up becoming this one, this one big snowball that's rolling. But we've had a lot of factors that have been driving growth, and we've talked about it a lot. And I think this is just a really good time for us to rededicate ourselves to, we're going to learn how to manage it. We're going to learn how to talk about it. We're going to learn how to measure it. And we're going to have to, if we're going to do this, we're going to need to apply ourselves to making our priorities and committing to be able to do some things differently. I'm ready for the next one. So we need solutions. Our physical space is strained. We're maxing out parking and camping. The density is hard on the land. Often our path space and audience space is packed beyond reasonable capacity. Some of this is a physical space and some of it's a design issue. We designed a lot of our spaces for when we were much smaller. Our main stage, for example, it was dangerous, it was unpleasant, and it didn't work well to have Phil there. That was too big of an act for too small of a space. But if we had put Phil out in the parking lots, we could have had 3 times as many people out there safely and comfortably. So some of our congestion issues and some of our growth issues and capacity issues are related to our infrastructure. Part of it's related to our systems and how we're doing things. If we had a different wristband system, for example, and people didn't have to wait in line for 2 hours at peak to get wristbanding, maybe that's being computerized out there. Maybe it's, I don't know what, but it's not always the number of people that are the issue. Sometimes it is our system or our physical world or just the way we're handling it. And just to remember also that our core mission does involve reaching the public, whether it's educating the public, whether it's entertaining the public, whether it's involving them in community. Even our new members who are getting a volunteer experience, that's part of who we are and why we exist. And to be able to outreach, to be able to meet our diversity goals, to keep our core mission alive, I believe really depends upon staying engaged with the community and not becoming just our internal population becoming the only priority. So I'm a big advocate of not decreasing our ticket sales in order to increase our internal population. I think we need to keep both in balance and remember the reasons for both. And if we only limit our public sales, a lot of those internal costs, even if we reduce our costs, which we can, if we reduced our cost, we still have a tremendous amount of costs that we would be shifting from the public to us. And the public is paying well over half of all of our expenses. We make more money on the public than we do from our internal people. So it would be a huge change in our model to put big limits on our public. So, okay, and then I'm ready for the next one, Linda. So our next steps, I think, are we need to gather more data. And here I'm going to bring up the word metrics again. Some of the metrics we need to understand things like a path that is 25 feet wide. How many people, what's the density that people can be on it? How quickly can people move through it? How many, there's a lot of safety issues involved too, but we need metrics to be able to measure how well can we provide services with the physical structure that we have, and where are the physical pinch points operationally and physically for safety, for comfort. What's the maximum safe density on the paths? How many people can we physically feed with that main camp kitchen in an hour? you know, how many people if we add more people, what does that mean for our water system? How much more water capacity? How many more water trucks per day need to come if we have 5,000 more people on site? Some of this information might be in the crews. We don't have it in a concerted way. We don't have, I was there when we, you know, Ann and I worked with one of the cartographers to try to measure the stage areas. And we came up with really inadequate measurements. We didn't know exactly, you know, how many benches were in each place. We didn't know exactly how far back the audience went. So, you know, we could kind of measure the space, but it was not, we didn't get useful information for really being able to say, okay, at any given moment in the middle of the day, how many people can be watching a show? And I think we have way too small of audience areas for the number of people we have on site and for the, you know, how much we love and, you know, want to show off our entertainers. And I think there's other metrics like that too, that we are trying to do something on an outdated model and with physical structures that were designed for a much smaller event. And I think we really need to look at those things with a fresh eye to how do we solve some of our growth and capacity issues through design and through systems and not just through reducing people. But for this year, I really hope that we will carry forward the 35,000 people on property goal and work hard on developing new ideas, developing measurements, developing strategy. You know, I think we need to work on finding ways that we can move people from crew to crew, for doing longer term planning, and for figuring out, are we going to be best served for comfort and safety by keeping our total event is 35,000 people a day on site the safe, comfortable number? And if it is, what does that mean for how big do we want the internal population? How big do we want the ticket buying public? Are there other solutions to include people? Should we become a camping event? Should we have campsites for the next generation who want to be included? There's a lot of questions that we haven't really asked because we've just been going forward with this model. And I think we've reached the point with the model that we just step back from another huge growth spurt that we would not have been able to sustain. So I think this is the time to, you know, take a breath and start looking around and work on those solutions for growth. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for Linda for the revenue projection piece.
Excuse me, this is Lucy. I've been taking minutes. Is somebody else taking minutes? If so, I will stop.
It's being recorded.
Hello?
So
Lucy, it's being recorded.
Hillary did indicate that it's being recorded, it's being live streamed, so it'll be available on YouTube. Are you taking minutes for the budget committee?
Yes. Because there's also been a limit in terms of who has access to what's been recorded in the past. And that
this is a public meeting. It's a work session. There's not going to be, this is not a committee meeting. This is not being limited.
Yes. So yeah, this is not a committee meeting. That
Lucy, if you want to, that's great. And, you know, we'll make sure they get up somewhere. There isn't anybody else doing it.
Okay, I will carry on.
The recording should be available to the membership, but I think that the way it will be is linked to on the .net site, but it's also going to be on YouTube.
Okay, I'll make minutes and they can get posted somewhere. I mean, it's useful to have a record.
Thanks.
Yep.
So do we want to take any questions on the previous slides? Because this is kind of a natural break. If there.
That's okay with me if you want to do that, Linda. We have time for questions after you've spoken also, and we were going to do a board session of questions first and then open to the membership. But if you and Hillary feel like right now is a natural time for questions, we can do that. I just want to make sure we get through your data also before we dive deep.
Yeah, okay. I guess I was thinking if it was something very specific. But maybe I'll just quickly go through this because it actually won't take very long.
Okay.
So this, what I'm sharing here are the projections for 2023 with the proposed data recommendations that came out of the Financial Planning Committee. So you can see in 2022 what was approved by the board, and then this is the proposal that's going to the board for 2023. And here's the ticket sale, not ticket sales, the prices. Sorry, it's been a long day. The prices behind that data. So I've talked about this in the annual planning meeting. I talked about it in the board meeting. So this isn't anything different, but I'm talking about it again just to make sure everybody's aware. Now, there's one thing on the previous slide, 2022 was on the left and 2023 was on the right. So please note that now they're reversed on the previous page. So 2022 is what was approved by the board for prices. And 2023 is the pricing recommendations that came out of the Financial Planning Committee. For 2022, the prices for the Financial Planning Committee came up with is in this first column. And the board, however, changed the prices for the booth folks. And so that's what was actually approved. So for you know what, I can make this bigger probably, if that's helpful to people. That's probably too big. For 2023, we are recommending no changes to any of the prices, except for going back to the recommendation that the Financial Planning Committee presented for last year, for 2022. All of the other passes are the same price as they were in 2022. Oh, can you make this any bigger? Did I make it big enough, Sue?
Yeah, that's a little better. Thanks, Linda.
Yeah, I know it's tricky.
I know a lot of us have seen it, but for the folks who haven't.
Yeah. And this is also posted on the .NET site. I'm actually I'm on the .NET site right now, so you can look at it at your convenience. And this is a proposed at 15,000 tickets per day.
Yeah, and I'm just going to
Anything you want to
interject.
point out?
Yeah, on the admissions number, it goes up, and the reason it goes up is that in the past, the 3-day tickets, we just sold as many as we could. And then in this projection, it's saying that the 3-day tickets, we will limit to 3,500 of them. They had been going, the number that we had sold had been going up, but this says that there will be a limit. And then we also kind of adjusted, because we adjusted the number of tickets that would be day of. So it's only, the prices are the same, but the projection was a little bit different.
Yeah, thank you, Hillary. That's a good point. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now unless anybody has anything in particular. I can definitely share if we need to reference any of the data that's been presented, but I'm going to go ahead and stop now so that everybody can see everyone's faces.
Are you, Hillary and Linda, are you ready for questions from the board now? Okay. So does anyone on the board have questions, comments, clarification? It sounds like some people's mics aren't muted. Can everyone just make sure your mic's muted till you're on the docket? Okay, AJ, you're up.
Yeah, I just had a hope it's not too weird of a question, but at the revenue stream that we're looking at here, does it make any difference? If since Saturday is our biggest day, and it's been like that forever, would it make any difference to stay at that 35,000 tickets sold, but do a larger day on Saturday, say 17,000, and do smaller days on the days that we usually get smaller?
AJ, it's all going to be hypothetical and guess. The thing is, I think we're doing some experiments. That's what we've done in the past. We've let people buy 17, 18,000 on Saturday and then had lower Friday and Sundays. This proposal is basically saying, no, we're not going to have a more crowded Saturday. And we hope that they will then buy tickets for Friday and Sunday, that some of those that wanted, if they hit a sellout, that they would then come Friday or Sunday. We'll find that out. It's a little bit risky, potentially, but what this is aiming to do is to have more of a comfort and safety level and not getting those higher crowds. And, if we had even attendance all 3 days, think of, maybe Sunday would drop off, maybe Friday and Saturday are the same. It creates a different kind of flow than having that big surge in an extra crowd. So that's basically what this proposal is saying, let's try that.
John Alexander?
Thank you. And thanks, Linda and Hillary. I'm always so impressed with these numbers. You guys do an amazing job. You all do an amazing job. Thinking about AJ's idea and just other ideas that might come up, it seems like one thing, as from the board talking about this and hearing from the membership, is thinking of it in a way of ideas that we can then, because we're so limited in the amount of time we get to have conversations about these, throwing ideas out that we can then, Tom can help us prioritize and start to answer or experiment with in the hypothetical scenario kind of piece to this that Hillary's talking about. So I think that's a good idea. I mean, another idea, good or bad, right? It would be increased price on Saturday. There might be others, but so I think that this is really, thank you for doing this for us and for having taking the extra time to do this. Thanks to the membership for coming, and I think this is a great opportunity to put ideas, good or bad, on the table for us to kind of prioritize and think about as we address these challenges that we all do, which is change and growth. So appreciate it.
John Silvermoon? Or sorry, did you want to answer that, Hillary and Linda? Okay. John Silvermoon?
I had a couple questions. Going back to that hypothetical chart, looking at 2023, dropping it down, I think it was a little over 31,000, Hillary. You had a significant drop in day passes. What were you envisioning with that drop in day passes? I'm curious.
There's a couple of different kinds of day passes. There are worker day passes that get used by crews and by booth people. We are combining what used to be called the VIP passes and the Peach passes, and those get used for a variety of purposes. They, some are used as comps and thank yous, some are used operationally. There's it's basically looking at those and trying to, tick away. I'm not recommending that, but I think we could get it, I think, pretty easily. We could hit 200 or 300 a day, which that means 600 passes, basically. By encouraging booths not to use them just to purchase them, just as a cheaper pass to give to your friends, but to say that they need to be working to ask some of the larger entertainment crews. For example, Main Stage has gotten 220 of them. to say, yeah, let's not use them just for comps and thank yous. Let's find other ways to, say thank you to people, but to use them, more targeted for, people who we are, trying to invite to be at the fair rather than as just thank yous or comps or as, cheap, cheap thing.
Okay, and then advanced passes and day of. How do you define advance? When is the cutoff for purchasing an advance ticket price?
Well, I think we could look at that. I think we could look at, right now, day of is day of, advance is before day of. And I think we could look at that and look at, a lot of events have levels that there's, the early bird special. And when those are sold out, then you go to the next level. We haven't done that, but I think we should consider doing that. But right now it's literally day of or the day before, that's when the price changes.
So somebody going to buy a day of Saturday pass and found it was not available could then turn around and purchase an advance pass for Sunday with the current setup. Okay, thank you.
No. Yeah, because Sunday's the next day. Yeah.
Yeah. So they would actually get it cheaper than what they would have paid on Saturday. So,
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other board members have questions or comments? Okay, so let's go to the membership. Lucy, I presume your question at the beginning was about minutes. Is that correct? If that's correct, we're going to Kirk.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thanks. Kirk, you're up.
There we go. Hi, everybody, and thanks. As John said, John Alexander, thanks for the hard work you guys have put in on this. I know it takes a lot, and I appreciate the effort. And I am on the Financial Planning Committee, as well as the Path Planning Committee, and a past board member, and also construction crew. And so for years, I've been part of the stuff on the ground, trying to help make the spaces better, pinch point issues, stage size issues, etc. And it's really tricky and it's hard. And I know that Hillary knows that, and Linda. But I do want to kind of share a bit of a sense, as I heard your presentation, of the sense that efforts to deal with comfort of and safety of our attendees on the ground has by no means been sort of a static. The model has been constantly evolving and working, and it is time to dig in some new ways and get some new metrics and try some new things. But certainly every one of the new areas that we've opened up over time has been about crowd comfort. And then, as Hillary notes, the minute you do that, then somebody says, well, how are we going to get new people to come to this new area? Oh, well, we need another stage, or we need to add some food booths, or we need to have additional services for safety, Whitebird, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I've seen over my 30 plus years of this kind of a thing is this kind of accordion process where, oh, it's crowded and it's bad. And those ones in the 90s were the worst. They were hell. And then, okay, we got to do something. And so we completely changed the way the drum tower takes up the junction area, and things like that. But we then put out a new big area, and it actually creates an internal growth, as Hillary said. And then that settles. And then there's a period where there's very, very small or incremental kinds of growth that might just be more program directed, or somebody needs to do something. And then another big space is opened up. And so there's this kind of accordion and breathing process. And I'm sharing this hopefully as kind of an addition to the history and background stuff that I think was presented in the slides, and presented generally quite well. But there has been a lot of effort, constant effort in purchasing lands and rethinking paths all the time. And quite a few different people who've been involved in trying to do that. But I know I've been near or part of that process for a long time. So So it has been an active, ongoing thing, and I think it does need to continue. We've got to keep going. Path planning, I think, is at least one place to do that. LUMP is another. So those are areas for both doing work but gathering metrics and data. We did do some things in our path planning this year about watching, trying to watch crowds in audience areas. And we've got maps trying to come develop to kind of identify audience size and their potentials. But then this year was so off as far as like what really happened. It's like, oh, well, that really kind of worked at Daredevil. Will it work next year? Who knows? So there is a lot of unknown, and I do commend this effort to try to. I think a lot of it is about bringing awareness to the board level, because there are a lot of groups who have had this kind of awareness and tried, but it's a little more localized into crews and committees, and may not have made it to a board level, or, you know, and so for budget, Treasury to kind of grab a piece of it and try to bring this forward, I think is great. But I do think that there's a sense that there has been an evolution going on, and dealing with our crowds and our things is multi-pronged. Everybody in some way or another, whether it's hospitality and they've given a new mission to try to feed people, to try to deal with the board direction, to try to get, you know, to not have to increase food vouchers. Boom, that creates internal population. And great people end up rising and doing the best they can. And that question that Hillary asked, how much can our kitchen handle? That's a damn good question. And it ain't much. We're strained. I wanted to speak about metrics. And I think that anything that the board or management or the committees around this can do to help develop some metrics would be beneficial. One of them obviously can be data gathering by some of our planning type committees. Another is we do have a survey crew, and I don't know how they got used this last year. Might not have been very strong, but that's something that could be looked at. Another one was when I was on the board, I did get a motion passed that was supposed to require volunteer crews and other contributors to log in their hours, and so that would be available as a data item that would really tell how many hours are brought to bear to put this together. And then you can begin to sift through that and start to say, well, are those efficient hours? Are those well spent hours? Are those hours that we could spend more efficiently some other way? But if you come in and say, well, you know, construction crew has 160 base passes plus trades and on, quick figure, call it 200. And we ask for 80 hours a piece. We don't quite get it. We get way more from some, we get less from others. But, you know, times that's a lot of hours to set up, and then Decon does the takedown, and the site crews, the pre-fair crews, the setup and takedown crews put in a lot of hours. And we just don't know what those hours are. And I think that's a bad thing from a revenue point of view, to not have an awareness of what it takes, because if we had to pay for that, we couldn't. And so when we turn around and then start to talk about, well, maybe, you know, SO prices should go up, or people should be, you know, if you're going to be on site, you better pay for your own toilets and showers or something like that. Well, don't forget, most of these people are working too. You know, they're giving to the fair. And by not having, nobody ever picked up that charge. Many board motions, and some of you new board members will discover this in time, that you make a motion and it passes and nothing really happens. My motion didn't get picked up. We had changes in management at that time, and it kind of got lost. So it didn't follow through. And so we're missing a metric. And I think that if we could pick that one back up, we'd get some really interesting metrics. At any rate, I appreciate all the efforts that's been done this evening. And I did have one actual question. I'm based on the presentation I'm seeing. the board has not yet passed the revenue projections that were put together during revenue projection meeting. Is that correct?
Correct. We put it off till the end of January.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And
Hillary, your hand, but you can respond to everyone as the main information.
yeah, and Kirk, I'd like to apologize that I didn't give more acknowledgement to the work you and the path planning construction have done. I know you've been on the front line of dealing with the physical plane of, you know, especially inside the 8 of those pinch points and everything. So, you know, while the original system was designed, I wanted to totally give credit that you guys have done a tremendous amount of work, you know, all those increases that you've been involved with, all the path expansions, like I'm aware of that. And part of my point is we need all of our efforts to be less siloed and more coordinated, and to, you know, for all of our systems to be considered as we do growth, and to have those metrics so that we understand the impact when we're doing a change. How does that roll out? So, but thank you, Kirk. You certainly are very, very familiar with the effects of large crowds and dealing with our systems.
Grumpy.
Hi, you all. I just wanted to make sure that we all remembered that this is all about financial planning, and making sure, hopefully, that in the future we make enough money to still exist. And that's one of the important things. And I think the matrices or the capacity that we're talking about, and hopefully you all will be talking about, will keep that at the back of your minds, because as we all know, right now, the fair is this year, or however long you want to talk about it, is being funded by the federal government and whatever those programs were. And we have a lot more paid employees that we have to make sure we have enough funds to keep on staff. So the key of the 15,000 members, I'm sorry, public per day, probably Saturday is the only day that we really get and can guarantee that we will have 15,000 people. So we have to either figure out a way to spread that 15,000 to Friday and Sunday, or have more than the 15,000 on Saturday, so that the average is 15,000. So keep remembering that our population really is the high of Saturday, the middle of Friday, and the low of Sunday. Thank you.
AJ, is your question about the process of tonight's meeting?
Yes,
Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure that people are making sure that they don't talk for too long, because there's membership is here, and I think everybody should have a chance with an hour left to speak.
Well, we actually only have 13 minutes left in this section, but we've only got a few people on the stack. One member, which is the section we're in now, and then we're going to go on to the next bit. But thank you for a time grounding in the schedule. Alex, you're up.
Hey, yeah, I just wanted to briefly talk about the main camp kitchen capacity that was raised. So I think in our current configuration and in ideal staffing conditions, which we didn't really have this year, but in 18 and 19 we did, we can get about 750 people an hour through main camp. And we are definitely at the limit. So, you know, factor that into the planning going forward. Also, inflation is going to hit food costs pretty hard. We kind of plan for that. I think we're going to be okay, but you know, that's those costs are not getting lower anytime soon. So that's all I got. Thanks.
So we had the next agenda item is a final board discussion. So we'll come back to Sandra and Paxton. If there's no more members who have questions right now, we can just move on to that section. But I want to make sure, as AJ said, that we give the membership who's joined us tonight a chance to get any questions answered. So we'll give it maybe a 5 count or something, see if anyone has a question for Hillary or Linda. Okay, so then we were going to roll in next steps to the final board discussion, but Hillary, can I take Sandra and Paxton's questions straight off? Okay, Sandra, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to mention that this last year, when we sold out on Saturday, people bought Friday, and then when Friday sold out, they bought Sunday. So it actually sold out all 3 days. So that was really quite an effective strategy. And I also think that we are not done with COVID yet, and you know, that there could be more variants. So trying to keep our population, you know, trying to find the sweet spot, which is what I think that this effort is trying to find the sweet spot, is really important in keeping our numbers down so that we have the increased safety and space to and facilities to that we provide to people. So I think it's really important that we go through this process and keep our numbers as relevant to whatever the financial income is. You know, we'll be able to balance that. So yeah, anyway, thank you for doing all this work.
Paxton?
Wouldn't unmute. I really also appreciate the work. There's a lot of figures in here that I've been wanting to see for a long time, particularly on population, and that really the breakdown of the different passes and teams and stuff like that really helped me visualize things a lot better. There are places I did not understand well in the past. I want to advocate for just keeping it at like 15K straight across the board. I'm not in favor of upping Saturday. And the reason I say that is because I don't think there's 2,000 less of us that are not going to be there. So it just adds to the crowd. And I, for a long time, have thought that Sundays are a good measure of what we want to aim for. And that often was in the 13 to more recently 15,000 crowd. So I think it's an advantage if we actually sell out all 3 days. And I expect that will be the happening in the future. So if we keep it at 15,000, thank you. I appreciate the work. It really was a lot of information that helped me a lot.
Hillary and Linda, I just want to make sure that you know you can jump in if you have responses to anyone.
Thanks. I just want to mention that that chart has been on the website for some time. And if people want to find that the presentation tonight is like just picking out little bits and pieces from the capacity papers in the past. And if you go to the .NET site, go to the Board of Directors section, and under Board Working Documents, they're all listed as capacity. There's about 5 different reports. And the first one is more just leading up to the discussion, but the next 3 or 4, there's charts and a lot more of this kind of brainstorming and everything.
Thanks. Anne?
I just want to say I really appreciate looking at people on site. That's a really important metric measurement that I think we've overlooked, as Hillary has said, for years. Much of what Grumpy said, or most of what Grumpy said, I agree with. And I appreciate Sandra addressing COVID because we're definitely not done yet. As someone who has looked at historical things through the past, I realize that what is classified as epidemics endure. It's still a big thing with a long tail out there, which, you know, people will have to deal with. I'm very frustrated in that one of the things that I find is not really dealt with outside of LUB committee is the emerald ash borer as a natural type disaster and the effects that it will have. Today, I sent a recommendation to Kevin, the arborist, saying maybe instead of trying to map the ash stands, we map the stands that are not ash, so we know where we're going to have shade, where we know where we will have things for the public to be in who pay for these daily tickets. And I think this is something that has to come back to path planning. And I think we have a couple of years, but we have to really start thinking out as to this natural type disaster things. And lastly, I consider COVID a cultural disaster thing because of how it has affected society in general. Thank you.
AJ?
Yeah, as I was listening tonight, I was thinking about what I would consider the elephant in the room sort of thing, and that is what has been the discussions around the Dead and Company playing on the same weekend as Fair this upcoming year, and has there been any discussion on how that might affect our numbers? It's my thought that it may not affect our ticket sale numbers, but it definitely, I believe, will affect our volunteer population. And so I wonder what kind of conversations are going on about that, and what you think.
We haven't had a lot of conversations. A survey might not be a bad idea. I'm just starting to Google now how much capacity the gorge has, just to get an idea. Thanks, AJ. That's a good.
John Silverman?
So one of the things I look at here is when we talk about financial planning, what we're really talking about so far is what our program income we're projecting. What we really aren't addressing that I think we need to address, and perhaps this is another committee, a fundraising committee, is and perhaps longer range than just next year, is what other revenue can we be projecting in the way of grants, in the way of major donor work, because I think that's going to become increasingly necessary to sustain the organization. So I'm not sure what the role of the financial planning committee meetings in that, whether that requires us to finally put together a fundraising committee. But I really think when we think about financial planning, we should be thinking about more than just the program income and how we can project other numbers and how we can get other numbers up. And again, I think that's a much longer time frame than just 1 year. Thank you.
John Alexander?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Kirk, I've been thinking since I saw this first, some of these numbers first presented at our retreat about what you were mentioning. And I think that one additional thing, and this kind of relates to what AJ was just mentioning too, which is our population. And I've been thinking of our population and, the fact of even being elected to the board as, in my mind, our donors. And they are, at least the ones that are really there and doing it, are what makes all of this happen. And so they're also as much as what we're selling at the fair to the public as anything else, especially with regards to our mission and the things that we share with the public. So one thing I think would be interesting, and we do this in our organizations, is figuring out a way, as you mentioned with hours, to calculate the value of our donor base with regard to their in-kind contributions. And that even could be, back to AJ, used for matching grants that just go straight to support our charity. Here's the amount of money we put out there. We'd like another foundation to match us and go out, or other things like that as far as revenue opportunities. And then I think the idea of using the survey crew, and then ultimately if we do a census, if we can get some really efficient questions that tell a lot. There seems to be a lot of variances in here. Of course, there are. And where are those variances? Which metrics do they most affect? do the day passes all really get used? You know, and then also asking questions about, you know, what is the impact and cost of a day pass versus a for a camping pass? And as we start to make these decisions, think about leveraging those decisions as much as possible to have the biggest impact, which means then we want to be thinking about our questions as far as results are concerned. So is it about finances? Is it about lowering the number of people on site? Is it about lowering the people on site during the day versus at other times of the clock? And I think that the committee is doing a fantastic job in the idea of going with the survey group to get some of these answers, and it's a long-term set of questions. The last thing I just wanted to mention is the idea of putting Phil out in the parking lot. And I know, Hillary, you guys are throwing out a lot of great ideas. So it's not just that idea in general, but the idea, again, of thinking about our donors and what is the impacts of any decision we make on our event. Are we another festival, or are we the Oregon Country Fair? And how do we maintain that? So we can create new models, but our model is also what makes us unique. And so how can we create new models that result in efficiencies with regards to the metrics that we're trying to change? So this work is, again, so important and great. I thank you all for presenting these. And as though if there's any designs or anything involved in surveys or doing numbers and things like that, I'll try to keep of course, because we're listening to all these conversations on what the finance committee is doing and other things. But I think those are some things to think about maintaining and thinking about our donor base. And then the ideas that Hillary has about moving people around in the right ways. The one last thing I'll just leave it at that. But thank you all very much. And what of this makes us unique?
So we're in a section for board final discussion, but we have one non-board member on the stack. Hillary and Linda, are you okay if we take Grumpy's question and then we'll throw it back to you guys to do next steps? Grumpy, go ahead.
So some of you know I'm a bum, and I was an ex-treasurer and a coordinator of traffic for a while. I've kept numbers for over the years and the population numbers over the years. So I just wanted to throw out some numbers from because Paxton mentioned Sunday. Sunday in basically the average on most Sundays was 13,000 people. So just factor that. And if anybody needs the spreadsheet on what the numbers were per day, you can let me know. And someplace I assume they're there. But we had there's only been, if you don't count 2019, because 2019 was the 50th, we only had two other Sundays that had 15,000 people, and that was 2002 and 2015. And then I have one question. I'm not sure, John Alexander, when you mentioned donors, are you talking about volunteers or people who are just giving money to the fair? I didn't understand.
I'm talking about volunteers. I'm talking about the time, like we put on an event with all of these people doing this, like millions of dollars worth of work that other festivals probably don't, you know? And so, yes, I'm thinking of all of us that contribute our time as volunteers to the fair as a significant donor pool that could be leveraged, significantly.
I wasn't sure that's what you meant, but thank you.
Okay. Hillary and Linda, do you want to take it for next steps and a closing?
Sure. So the easiest next step to put on the calendar is the meeting at the end of January, where the board will consider the Financial Planning Committee's revenue projection. And then the other next steps, it's a little bit more amorphous, but I hope we do find some concrete ones. You know, and I think the survey crew did work on a demographic survey this year, but as we know, that might not be a representative. I don't know if we should, you can always contact Linda and me and the budget committee through the budget committee at Oregon Country Fair, if you have ideas. But I think we'll just continue to, work on creating some proposals and trying to find the way through this. Maybe working a little bit more closely with the path planning committee and, Staff's got some ideas. So if you read through those documents, there's a lot of brainstorming there. And, the brainstorming part's fun, picking the actual next steps, though, gets pretty exciting, like when you actually have a vision of next things to do. And I just think we can be patient with ourselves, but I hope that we will get commitment for it and, a resolve to try to consider, what changes will help us to continue to have a healthy, safe, and appealing fair. And I agree with John. We don't want to change the nature of the fair. We want to be able to be inclusive, accommodate the people who want to be there, and figure out how to deal with the changing times. We've done all this incremental growth, and I'm hoping we're heading into a time period where we are balancing this detail-oriented growth that's coming incrementally and a little bit intuitively with a more deliberate look toward the future of trying to, get that longer term planning horizon and the bigger picture incorporated. So that's what I'm hoping for, and stand by for more proposals from us and from other people too. Linda, do you have anything?
Was that a no, Linda?
No, I don't know. I couldn't find my mute button. No, that's it, Hillary. Thank you. I think you covered everything that I had in my mind.
Okay. And thanks, Linda, for, all your work on the spreadsheets and all the PowerPoint and all the helpful feedback and engagement on all of this. And thank you, Lily and Vanessa. Thank you for getting this set up for us. And thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
you very
Thanks.
much for your
And
help,
thank you.
Lily and Vanessa.
And thanks especially to Hillary and Linda for doing all this work, both tonight and other nights. So stay tuned on the .NET site for the documents that were shared tonight and the recording. I think the easiest place to find it would just be on the YouTube channel.
Can I share one more thing, please?
Say that again?
Can I share one more thing, please?
Sure.
So I mentioned earlier about the debt and company. I think it would be a mistake for us not to take that into serious consideration as we move forward with this next fair. And so I would like that to be a big part of the discussion going forward. I don't know where that discussion happens, Hillary and Linda. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this so far, but I think that it has it can be problematic.
AJ, I think I agree with you, and I think it's a good thing to get. One possible way to start investigating is to get staff to start contacting like the 30-day crew coordinators and say, talk to your people, get an idea. Is this going to affect them? Do they know, who's buying tickets, who's planning on not being there? There are ways to approach it, and it's much more on an operational level, I think, than at a officer or board level. But you're right. It could have a big impact.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Good to see you.
Have a good night, all.
Ciao.
Thank you. Very educational.
I have a question. Was it in the intention of this meeting to do brainstorming primarily, or to just primarily offer thoughts on what's been going on?
Hillary and Linda are gone, and they're the ones who called this work session. So I can't speak to that, but the agenda, which is the only thing I saw, I wasn't part of the planning, was just for.
I think it was really to educate people with all of the work that's been going on to try and get us all on the same page. There's, a lot of this work has gone on, and it just, I learned new stuff on this one. So I really appreciated it.
Okay, thanks all.
And thank you, Lily, for being a good facilitator again.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, have a good night.
99.
Thanks, Vanessa. Is this your Zoom?
Yes, I'm trying to wait for everyone to say goodbye.
To get away?
It'll never end. It'll never end.
Okay, well
It'll
then we're
never
gonna
end.
shut it down.
Good
Good
night.
night, everybody.
Shut it down.